appearing here for the New Right Network, and I'm going to be interviewing Alan Bakari. He is an investigative tech reporter for Breitbart, who has written this excellent new book called Deleted: Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. And having a background in tech support myself, and I write a lot about tech issues, I was dying to read his book. And welcome to the interview, Alan.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, so I bought your book because I figured, where is somebody going to go on the internet to find out all about this censorship and these egregious things happening to conservatives by big tech than someone like yourself, who has been immersed in this full-time covering all this big tech censorship? And I was not disappointed. I try to keep up with this as much as I can, but I've learned so much from your book. It is so much more vast. You can't just do a quick and easy search on the internet to find all this information. So, first of all, I was curious, how did you pull all this together? How did you find all this information? And, how can other people find this kind of information besides obviously following your columns on Breitbart and going to good sites like that?
Oh, well, yeah, of course, definitely follow our stuff on Breitbart, follow Breitbart Tech. We've been covering the issue since 2015, before it was on most people's radar. The internet was still pretty free and open back then. But certainly what I wanted to do with the book was sort of dig beneath the surface, because we can all see the bans happening every day. We can see the surface level censorship, but we know a lot less about the stuff that goes on behind the scenes with the algorithms, the way these tech companies manipulate what appears in our search results, what appears at the top of our Twitter feeds or our Facebook feeds. And I've had the good fortune to be able to talk to lots of whistleblowers in Silicon Valley, the few remaining conservatives in the industry, in these companies, Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And they sort of put their careers on the line, even if they come forward anonymously to reveal these stories, because these companies are experts at tracking people, including their own employees. But yeah, the stuff beneath the surface is important to understand. So, just one example I discuss in the book is the way that everything on the internet, whether it's a Twitter post, a Facebook post, or a link that you want to post on Google, or a link that you want to rank on Google, or a YouTube video, it's all assigned a numerical value by the algorithms that decide where it appears in the search results, where it appears on your feeds. That's because the way algorithms operate is, on the basis of data and numbers. That's essentially how they work. Now, it used to be, and the companies have different words for this score that all the content has. Some call it a quality score. And what used to go into that score was, a range of considerations that could be considered very politically neutral. So, if say Google's search algorithm was deciding whether to promote your link on the first page or bury it on the 10,000th page, or just erase it altogether, they might look at, well, does website contain malware? Does it contain viruses? Does it contain illegal content? Those were the kinds of things that their algorithms would look for in determining whose websites to bury in search results and whose to put on the front page. And equally, it would look at, is the content new? Is it relevant to the search? Is it from an established website? Things like that. And the reason it does it, of course, is because, there are millions and millions of links to sort through. Google has to decide one way or another what to put on your front page. And that's very important, because if you look at the SEO statistics, you can just, search for this yourself. These are all public figures. Something like 90% of people don't go beyond the first page of Google search results. So if you're not on that front page, you might as well not be on Google at all. So I mentioned some of the factors that go into that, that ranking score that all these Silicon Valley platforms use. But of course, increasingly since 2016, they've added all these other considerations as well. So instead of asking whether your website contains malware or viruses or spam, the algorithms are now also asking, does your website contain conspiracy theories, hate speech? Is it known for misinformation? Is it an authoritative source? By authoritative, they mean, is it the New York Times, is it CNN, is it the Washington Post? So increasingly, the numerical scores used by these algorithms are starting to resemble the Chinese social credit system, where if you don't conform to the values of the ruling elite, your presence gets erased, your secret score goes down, you get buried and invisibilized. So this is, I think, just one of the examples in the book of something where we have a vague idea of how it all works, but we don't really know exactly, how these algorithms are sorting us and ranking us and on what basis.
And you've done a great job in the book of explaining that, because the big tech will tell us, to our face, no, you can't change an algorithm. They're all fair. They're all balanced. And, you explain how that's not true. And as a writer for Town Hall, I've seen my articles over the last few years get downplayed by Google. Like, I can go to Google News, for example, and do a search on my name, Rachel Alexander, and you won't pull up a single article that I have written for Town Hall. It's gotten that bad. Now, let me go on and ask you. You talk about censorship of all these other conservatives in your book and conservative websites. Have you personally been censored yourself?
I've managed to escape it somehow, maybe because they know I'm a tech reporter, maybe because, I talk to these companies every day, their press teams, almost, it's like literally every day, almost every day I'm reaching out, this account got banned, why did you ban them? What rule did they violate? So I don't know, maybe I'm on a whitelist of some kind, I don't know, but I managed to escape censorship myself. Then again, I'm not really very controversial on social media. I don't actually post a lot on most platforms. It's mainly just Twitter. So I think if I was putting out more content across all these platforms, I probably would have encountered it at some point. I think it's nearly impossible for a conservative not to encounter censorship if you're posting on all the platforms at once. And that's another thing that I discuss in the book, the way these censorship algorithms, they don't only look at what you yourself are posting, they also look at who you're following. So if a big conservative account gets banned from hate speech, that's not the end of the story. That's also sending a signal to the algorithm, telling the algorithm that there are millions of accounts that were also following this account known for posting so-called hate speech. So while that might not get those accounts banned as well, it will lower their score, so they might be more likely to be banned in the future, or they might be covertly suppressed. So the point I make is that Silicon Valley has developed technology now, not just for censoring one or two people, but for censoring and covertly suppressing entire political movements, entire networks of people.
What I found terrifying in your book was how you revealed that Facebook has a list of so-called hate agents, and they include people like Candace Owens, who to me is very mainstream conservative. She's very reasonable. And then they go and they look and they see if other people are friends with her, even if you're not even friends with her online on social media. They look and see their connections with her, like a photo that was taken of you with her at an event and things like that. Like, I had no idea this was going on. And I truly believe, they're eventually going to try to come after you, but thank goodness you've been able to, foil them to some extent, at least until now. What is the current status of Breitbart itself now? Because I know it has had some issues with censorship in the past. Are you guys under any of that right now?
Well, we published data over at Breitbart News, published it a few months ago, showing that Google actually cut search visibility to Breitbart News by over 99%. I think the full figures are like 99.3 or 99.7% compared to the same period in 2016. That's obviously almost a complete shutdown of Breitbart, and it's happened to other conservative sites as well. And by the way, this happened not because Breitbart suddenly became less popular. We're still very, very strong with our readers. Our Alexa score is stronger than ever. You can look it up yourself. And lots of vast majority of readers still come to Breitbart by typing in Breitbart.com. They don't come through Google. So Google's not naturally down ranking us because we became unpopular, because our content stream stopped. Actually, we're putting out more articles, more content than ever before. This was clearly something artificial, and you can see it most obviously with these searches for Joe Biden, because after Google's latest algorithm changed, I think it was in May or sometime in the spring or summer, traffic and visibility on Breitbart links went to, on searches for Joe Biden, went to zero overnight, just fell off a cliff. That doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't just suddenly plummet like that. So clearly Google is putting their thumbs on the scales. They've said they want to do that. Actually, we released leaked footage at Breitbart News back in 2018 of their post-election meeting, and had the top executives there. They were talking about making the populist movement a blip in history. The co-founder said he found Trump's election offensive. and they were talking about Trump voters as if they were extremists. They even used the word extremists and talked about Google's anti-extremism tools in the context of the Trump election. So we've got their executives on tape admitting, revealing what their motives are, and now we're seeing traffic to, search visibility to Breitbart News and other conservative sites drop by 90% or more. So it's very obvious what's going on here.
That's horrible, but all I can say is, from looking on Facebook and Instagram and such, I still see Breitbart headlines everywhere out there. So we haven't reached, the awful tipping point for you guys yet. Now, one thing that interests me, which I found very compelling about your book, is you argue that maybe these 230 protections from liability should be dropped from big tech, especially Wikipedia. And your article there was just you hit it right on the head. I mean, they are a publisher, obviously. But how do we convince all these other conservatives out there that to do so would not be intervening in the free market? Because I keep telling people this has nothing to do with the free market. You should be able to sue somebody for liability, especially if they are kind of like a publisher. Why are we protecting them? So what would you say to all those conservatives?
Well, it's a very strange argument because Section 230 is a government handout. It's a special privilege that no other type of company enjoys. It's only given to the tech companies, a special immunity from defamation lawsuits and also from lawsuits around the taking down of content, the removing of content. This argument really emerged from the big tech-funded so-called conservative think tanks in DC. They're the ones pushing this. And you can tell it's an artificial argument, a kind of astroturfed argument that's made to seem like it's from the conservative think tank, while it's actually from Google and Facebook's tech lobbyists, their paid lobbyists in DC. Because how can you make a free market case for defending a government handout? It doesn't make sense. You can make a non-free market argument for why some companies should enjoy this special protection if they're just neutral platforms. You wouldn't sue a library because one of the books in the library defamed you. But the problem is these tech platforms are not behaving like libraries. They're not just giving you a stack of books or a stack of content to choose from. They're picking and choosing what you read. And as you said, that makes them more like publishers. So why, if they're publishers, should they be immune from defamation lawsuits which other publishers are subject to? Wikipedia, as you point out, are highlighted in the book. Wikipedia, I think, is the most powerful publisher in the world. More power to destroy a person or an organization's reputation than any other entity, I think, and they've done it repeatedly to numerous conservatives. They rely on totally anonymous, unaccountable editors. So the idea that Wikipedia is immune from defamation lawsuits is just crazy to me. You can make a case that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube might be, should get this protection if they were behaving like neutral platforms. Problem is they're not behaving like neutral platforms. So what needs to be done is the terms of Section 230 and the types of companies it applies to needs to be much more narrowly defined. I think the test should be, if you're going to have these special protections, these very valuable protections, by the way, immunity from defamation lawsuits is extremely valuable to these companies. If they didn't have that, they'd be on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars. If you want that, then any filtering you do on constitutionally protected speech should be at least opt out. Users should be able to opt out of that filter, much in the same way that Google, has a safe search button to filter obscene content. Users can choose to turn that on or off. It should be exactly the same with any other kind of filter they create on legal speech, whether it's hate speech or misinformation or fake news or whatever else they want to filter. That's fine as long as users don't have to live under their rules, as long as they get the choice to turn it on or off. And they haven't given users that choice because I think they care more about maintaining control over political narratives, maintaining control of the flow of news, and tipping elections now than they do about consumer choice and user choice. I think it's pretty obvious that this is, especially in the last 2 weeks, we've seen all of these efforts they made against misinformation and disinformation were very much focused on the election and stopping Donald Trump.
Well, and I'm really excited. You cited a bill out there that would do this and do it in the nuanced way that you just described. And I had never even heard of that bill because it doesn't get much mainstream media coverage. but I do believe Trump is going to do something in his second term to go after big tech. I think that's the one thing we've got finally, some momentum on, and I'm hoping that is what it will be. But what do you recommend for everyone out there to try to fix this problem? I mean, obviously, regarding the second Section 230 problem, we can ask people to lobby their members of Congress. As for social media, we can try to get people to avoid using a lot of the big tech companies as much as they can. But we all know, for some of us, and I'm sure you're like me, I mean, I need Google, I need Facebook for my career because other people are going to use it, whether I'm using it or not. And so, every day I get so flustered because I have to update so many different social media platforms. I mean, this on Facebook, this on Twitter, this on Instagram, this on Gab, this on Parler. And thank you, by the way, you got me to subscribe to Gab after I read your book, because I'm trying to find alternatives. And even though I hate having to update the mainstream ones, and then, the ones that conservatives are running to, I think I don't have any other solution. And I think that's the best we can do now. So what do you recommend for everybody else?
Well, I would certainly support those alternative platforms, Parler, Gab. I mean, if you want a die-hard free speech-focused company, you can't go wrong with Gab. They're totally committed to the principle. They even got deplatformed by their DNS provider. They got kicked off both app stores because they wouldn't compromise on free speech. So that's pretty impressive in my view. Self-censoring yourself by removing yourself from Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, very different. Instagram, I think, that's a big ask, because it's also, as I said, you're sort of self-censoring yourself because you're removing yourself from all the undecided people, all the persuadable people, all the potential customers who are on those platforms. So I don't think really businesses or politicians or political activists should have to do that. I think that's why you need, industry-wide reform, industry-wide regulations to give people some protection from these companies. But, you can do both things. You can agitate for more protections, more industry-wide protections. You can lobby a member of Congress, but you can also support the alternative platforms, Gab, Parler, BitChute, which is the YouTube alternative, DuckDuckGo, Startpage, all these other search engines as well. So you can absolutely do both things. And but the big thing really is to just vote in this presidential election. I don't think there's ever been a more important election for internet freedom. You've got one candidate, Joe Biden, saying he wants Facebook to do more censorship to censor Donald Trump's ads. And you've got the other candidate, Donald Trump. His administration is actually making some really meaningful moves on big tech. He's appointed Adam Kandayev to the federal bureaucracy. He's a great free speech lawyer. He's actually fought free speech cases against Twitter. So he knows exactly what he's talking about. He understands the issue. Brendan Carr, the current FCC commissioner, he's on board with Section 230 reform. The incoming commissioner, who's going to be voted on by the Senate after the election, Nathan Symington, also a hawk on regulating social media companies. And now Ajit Pai is on board as well. So you actually have probably a majority on the FCC that's willing to rein in the tech giants, which we haven't had before. So this coming election is going to be very, very important for free speech, not least because you won't really see anything from Congress, I have to say. There are some very good Republicans, some very good Republican senators and congressmen who are pushing forward on the issue. But, the Democrats will never allow, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, the Democrats will never allow legislation that will stop these companies from censoring, because, they depend on censorship too much.
I like your maybe necessarily going to the FCC or something instead of Congress. So I'm noticing we're down to probably the last minute or two. So this might be my last question. What I'm wondering is, do we know if Google is on track this election like it was in 2016, as Dr. Epstein testified in Congress, to influence the election, the presidential election, as much as he did, as it did for Hillary back then?
Well, I think even more so. I think you see this with the suppression of conservative media, Breitbart News, and many other publications, just their visibility totally killed by Google. So that alone is going to have more of an influence. That's to say nothing of the rest of the covert manipulation they're doing behind the scenes. We have no idea how they're fiddling with their algorithm. Actually, at the start of 2019, I published another story at Breitbart News showing that YouTube has a search blacklist for what they call politically controversial topics. So we know they're meddling with search results behind the scenes. Why wouldn't they do so this time around? They certainly have the motive. Google more than other companies because they're so closely tied to the Democrat Party. Eric Schmidt was one of Hillary Clinton's top advisors. So they'll absolutely interfere. They'll absolutely try and influence the result. They're doing so every day. We saw that last week with the New York Post. We see Twitter, deleting or censoring Donald Trump's posts, the White House press secretary's posts. We saw Facebook reduce the distribution on that New York Post story as well. They clearly are influencing it and trying to influence it. The question is, how effective will it be? I think this election is going to be a real test of whether Silicon Valley can indeed steal an election. The argument of this book, I think I demonstrated pretty clear they're trying to do so. The question is, will they succeed?
And it's terrifying when you look at the numbers, because you said in your book, it was, Epstein said something like 27 million to 57 million votes were tipped to Hillary.
He did, yeah, very, very big numbers. And we're going to see whether the ground game of the Trump campaign, the enthusiasm in their grassroots base can counteract that. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. The tech giants aren't omnipotent yet. There's still ways to get the message out, but it's growing increasingly difficult. And I think the remainder of online freedom that existed in 2015 and 2016 was a real help to the Trump campaign back then, because it allowed him to get his message out around the mainstream media directly to his supporters. It allowed his online grassroots movement to get the message out. And we were talking just earlier about the Donald on Reddit. That was a huge hub of Trump supporters, over 800,000, that did perhaps more than any other group on the internet to spread pro-Trump messages around. They were banned by Reddit before this election. So the advantage he had last time around in terms of the online grassroots is simply not there this time, because so many people have been banned, so many people have been censored, and now they're even censoring the president himself.
And I'm glad you bring up the Twitter, Donald Trump using Twitter, and because you appreciate its value. I get so frustrated when I hear these people, and sometimes they're, so-called advisors around the president, who complain about his tweeting. Well, you know what? Okay, sometimes he says a few things over Twitter that I wish he wouldn't have said, but it has been such a powerful venue. I wrote an entire article dedicated to saying Trump needs to continue tweeting. This is probably the most brilliant thing he has done during his entire term in office.
Yeah, he needs to, more would be even better. Periscopes, YouTube videos, Twitch streams, do everything. I mean, it's a way to talk directly to people without going through Jonathan Swan or some other, or this 60 Minutes reporter, Leslie Stahl, or whoever else is going to do a hit piece on you.
And as long as they're not cutting me off or going, I can ask one more question, at least I've got here. And this is something that I just personally am curious about. I've been so frustrated by the fact that we've had no competitors step up to the big mainstream social media companies. And you answered a lot of that by what they've done to big tech has done to Gab, and it doesn't allow it to compete. But is there also possibly a problem of funding? Because are some of these big conservative billionaires just funding these old, outdated think tanks in Washington, D.C., and when they should be putting money into Gab and Parler?
Well, you can't trust the Republican donor class. I mean, the Koch network, probably one of the wealthiest, maybe the wealthiest conservative donor network in the United States, is actually on the side of the tech giants. They're funding the think tanks that are defending the tech giants, trying to stop Section 230 reform. So, you can't trust the Republican establishment on this, and you certainly can't trust the donor class. If they aren't already supporting the tech giants, they probably don't understand the problem. So there's going to be no help from that. It really comes down to, this presidential election. It's amazing because Congress is not going to do anything. Big tech funds Republicans and Democrats. There are some Republicans who want to do something, but not enough. It really does come down to the executive branch. That's the only arm of the government right now that's taking meaningful action against the tech giants. So it's amazing how much comes down to just that one arm of government. And even around the world, European governments mostly support tech censorship. They demand more of it from the tech giants. So the last hope for online freedom really is a Trump victory.
Well, that does make me wonder, how much of this can Trump just do from executive orders? I mean, maybe not even go through even an executive agency.
Yep. Well, I mean, the FCC, as I said, if Trump wins, he'll probably have a majority on there for Section 230 reform. It remains to be seen exactly what form that will take. You know, there are right ways and wrong ways to reform a Section 230. I should point out, lots of big corporations want to reform Section 230 because it'll make it easier to file copyright lawsuits, but that doesn't really help ordinary people very much. What we need, I think, pointed this out earlier, is reform around Section 230 that says users have to be allowed to opt out of these content filters. That's the kind of reform that will protect the public and not just the interests of big business.
So what would you have your average American do? I mean, what would you have your average conservative armchair warrior, sitting at home do?
Find out who your local representative is, especially if you live in a red district, and make sure they know the issue is important to you. Look them up on a website called opensecrets.org and find out if big tech is funding them. If big tech is funding them, then you should absolutely write to them and say, stop taking money from big tech. I think taking money from big tech at this point, given the threat they pose to American liberties and American democracy, should be as unacceptable as to conservatives as taking money from Planned Parenthood. And it's surprising you'll find the amount of Republicans who still continue to take money from big tech. So yeah, I think you start with holding your representatives to account and make sure, primary elections, whether it's, Senate, congressman or president, look at really look for the anti-big tech candidate, because lots of candidates will say they're anti-big tech, they'll use the rhetoric, but their reform proposals are either toothless or they're still taking money from these companies.
I've got two more things, so I just wrote them down so I don't forget. I got into social media because of Americans for Prosperity back in the day. And back in, like 2008, they would send us to conferences and, they told us add all these friends on social media. And so I credit them with how I got my start in this area, at least the social media area. And what is so interesting is the Koch brothers have always funded Americans for Prosperity. And so I felt like, back then the Koch brothers obviously had the vision. They had the vision. Conservatives needed to become very active online and on social media. And, what has happened to them? I mean, maybe they think the thread, well, we liked Facebook back then, so now we got to like Facebook now too. No, that's something completely different. Facebook is morphed into something much different than it was back in 2008. So I just don't understand the disconnect.
Well, I think there are two issues at play. One is that all these, the Koch network and the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, they like deregulation, they like tax cuts, but they don't really like restoring order at the border. They never liked Trump's idea of a border war. They opposed Trump in the primaries actually very strongly because they're actually pretty pro-open borders. They want more immigrants to come in. It helps, in their view, it helps businesses because it allows them to lower wages. So I don't think they like the populist nationalist movement very much. They don't like the fact that, the populist nationalist movement and the Trump movement does not place as great an emphasis on so-called free trade that previous Republican movements did. Doesn't place an emphasis on deregulation as much. So they don't like that. They're not really on board with the Trump movement. So they probably don't care as much when they get censored on social media. And the other thing is, they just have trouble shedding this idea, this sort of pro-corporate instinctive response that you have to defend corporations at all costs. And it's really short-sighted when you look at the Section 230 issue, because, as we were saying, Section 230 is a government handout. And if you're going to take a government handout, there should be some strings attached to that, or you don't take it. I mean, these companies have the option of just being publishers and they can censor whoever they want, but they'll also be liable for defamation lawsuits.
Well, and you would think that information would get to, some of these conservative billionaires that you're telling me. I mean, but, I admit I didn't realize the story till I read your book. But I'm not some rich billionaire who people are giving me everything I need to know. So I just, the disconnect is odd, but one funny question I just want to ask you. Well,
just on that previous point, I'll just add quickly. I mean, with the Koch brothers, with the Koch organization, or the Chamber of Commerce really care if every critic of open borders was kicked off these social media platforms? I don't think they would.
You think it's that important of an issue to them that they would?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure they wouldn't say so openly, but they're funding all these think tanks that defend big tech from regulation. So I doubt they care very much.
Well, that's pretty sad. Then we need some other, conservative billionaires out there to fund the movement, because
Certainly do.
Because you can't just go with one issue that goes against the whole platform and just throw the others to the wolves. So I was just wondering, for fun, how confident are you then that President Trump is going to win re-election?
Well, honestly, I'd say it's 50-50 at the moment. I mean, I'm hesitant to make a decision one way or the other. Certainly, the polls are about where they were in 2016, but back in 2016, we didn't have all this tech manipulation. We had some of it, but not to this level. And also, this has been a much more stable race in terms of the polling. There hasn't been those ups and downs that we saw in 2016. So I guess we'll see. Trump clearly has all the enthusiasm. The Trump base has all the enthusiasm. So I'm going to reserve judgment for the moment. I think we'll find out on election night. But I certainly think that if it wasn't for the big tech censorship I described in this book, I think Trump would have been ahead in the polls for months by now, because the momentum that the online Trump movement had in 2015 and 2016 was unstoppable. If the tech giants had allowed that momentum to continue, to allow online grassroots Trump supporters to keep building up their audiences without getting banned and censored, they would have displaced the mainstream media. That's exactly why the mainstream media teamed up with these tech giants to censor their competitors. There's a whole chapter in the book on this. So